While we take a couple of days off construction, I want to give you an idea of the design process behind this build. I've seen a lot of designs and I've been given a lot of suggestions from a lot of different people. In particular, internet forums, several books that I've read, and there's a place in Brisbane called Ultraphonic Acoustics, and they provide products and advice on how to build these studios. Some of the designs that I'm using are things that they've suggested or modifications of things that they've suggested. So this is not all my knowledge, it's all stuff I've learned from other people and I'm sharing it with you. With a small budget project like this one, there's some products and some techniques on the market that you should be aware of that can really help you with your build. The first one is that whenever you do a wall or a ceiling, you'll tend to use double layer Techiques plasterboard. Now, this is not plasterboard, this is just 2 layers of MDF that I've glued together, but it's the same sort of thing and it'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Between the 2 layers, I've got a green line that I've drawn. Now that's to represent another product called green glue. So green glue comes in these corking tubes, and I'm using an equivalent product called Quiet Glue Pro. It's a little bit cheaper, but it does the same thing, but I'm just going to keep calling it green glue. Now green glue, when it's sandwiched between 2 layers of Techiques, adds about 90% more dampening or soundproofing than what you would normally have with just the Techiques. So it's an incredible product, and it was, before it existed, people had to, think of other ways to do this, sometimes with a vinyl sheet or some sort of heavy plastic or vinyl sheet that would go between them, but this product is sensational. The other product that you should be aware of is green glue sealant. Now this has got a different purpose. You don't sandwich it between the Techiques. You actually use it to run along all the seals, along the top edges of a room, down the sides and along the floor. So you use this to stop any little extra air gaps that might be there after you've done the plastering. Okay, let's talk designs. Now, what I'm about to show you is probably the most ideal design for a small studio. You would have 2 rooms, an inner room and an outer room, and there would be something a bit like these mock-ups. So the inside room would have 2 layers of Techiques with green glue in between. The outer room would have the same thing, 2 layers of Techiques with green glue in between, but they're completely decoupled and they're on their own freestanding frameworks. So this has probably 3 main advantages. The first advantage is that because they're decoupled, the soundproofing is fantastic. The other advantage is that there's a big air gap between the inner layer and the outer layer, and that's also good for soundproofing. The third advantage is that because you've got the sheeting on the inside and the outside, everything's very accessible if you needed to do a repair further down the track. So if there's a problem with the studio and you wanted to do a repair, you could simply pull off a wall, do the repair and put the wall back on. It's not a big deal. Now, as great as this design is, I can't use it for my studio. And the reason is because I can't put a layer of Techiques along the top of my joists because there's so much framework up in the ceiling. So this design doesn't work for me. The next design I'm going to show you is one that I got from Ultraphonic Acoustics in Brisbane. So I can't take credit for this one. It's a great design, and let me show you how it works. You basically take 1 stud wall and you plaster on both sides of it like that. You then plasterboard underneath the joist, and you use this device here called a resilient hanger to hang a false ceiling just below like that. Now this design has some real advantages. The first advantage is that you only need to have 1 stud wall, not 2. The second advantage is that you get a lot of ceiling height. You don't have to lose too much of the ceiling height with the resilient hanger. I was so convinced with this design that I actually went and bought something like 30 of these resilient hangers, and they're sitting in my garage, and I've changed my mind, and I'll tell you why. For me, I was nervous about the false ceiling because it's not allowed to touch the wall. Now that means you have to be very, very precise when you're cutting and hanging the plasterboard, because you need to have about 3 millimeters of gap between the edge of the false ceiling and the wall. I didn't think I'd be able to achieve that kind of precision. The other disadvantage for me is that this wall isn't truly decoupled from this one. They're both attached to the same stud wall, and that sort of makes me nervous. I could be completely wrong about that. It could be a very good design, but my common sense told me that if I could have it properly decoupled on a separate freestanding piece of framework, that's got to be better. So I changed my mind. So here's what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to combine the best of both designs. The ultraphonic design, I'm going to keep the plasterboard underneath the joists and on the outside wall. But then I'm going to have a freestanding inner structure like that. Now this gives me the best of both worlds because I've got a nice big air gap. Both structures are completely decoupled, and this requires a lot less precision and can be done a lot more quickly than either of the other two designs. Now you might be wondering, why don't I just plasterboard both sides of this stud wall anyway? Surely an extra wall would make it extra soundproof. But it actually doesn't, because it creates something called the triple leaf effect. When you have 3 walls or 3 leaves, it creates 3 air cavities, and that's less soundproof than 2 air cavities. The first air cavity is between this wall and this one. The next air cavity is between this wall and my inner structure. The third air cavity is the inner room itself. Now I don't quite understand how this works, but it's a thing, and it's a really important thing to avoid when you're building a studio because it makes your soundproofing much, much worse. So I'm going to stick with a wall on the outside and my inner structure wall, and that's it. The final thing I want to show you here is how we've used these little isolation pads to decouple the inside room from the outside room. You can already hear a difference. Here's the outside room, here's the inside room. It's pretty cool, hey? Here's how it works. This is a cross section of one of those bottom plates, and you can see there's the metal bolt that would go all the way down to the concrete. You've got the red rubber pad which stops the wood from touching the concrete, but then you've got this little black washer which is inside, and that stops the bolt from touching the wood. So essentially the bolt and the concrete don't touch the wood at all, and that's what creates the soundproofing.